Okay, I think we are live on Facebook because it's told me already that we are live on Facebook. I think we can start. Here you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for accepting the invitation and being part of this discussion. I think it's a very important moment for all of our countries and our societies to have a discussion, not only internally inside the country, but also to hear the voices from our partners, our friends, the countries that we look after while working through our problems and our difficulties. Let me introduce the speakers for today's discussion for starts, and then we will start the dialogue. First in a row, as I see it here, is Mr. Teddo Jafarიძე, who is currently working as one of the leaders of the Anaklia Consortium, which probably all of you know is one of the biggest hopes of Georgia's being still strategically important country for the rest of the world. Mr. Jafar이ძე was Georgia's ambassador to the United States, as well as former Minister of Foreign Affairs and head of National Security Council. Thank you, Teddo, for being with us. As far as I know, Mr. Jafar이ძე, while he was serving in Washington, was serving together with Mr. Alexandder, who was Czech ambassador to the United States. At the same time, Mr. Vondra is also former Minister of Defense and current member of the European Parliament from Czech Republic, and he's joining us from Prague, I would assume. Thank you, Mr. Vondra, for being with us. Mr. ედვინას კერძა is the Deputy Minister of Defense of Lithuania. Thank you, Mr. Kеრძа, particularly because I believe you are the busiest among all of us in these difficult times, because I would assume, like in Georgia, in Lithuania, army is also part of the whole activities that are carried out by the governments during this lockdown times. And thank you very much once again for joining us from Vilnius. Mr. Roman Jakic, who is currently the chairman of the Liberal Southeast European Network, is also my former colleague, former Minister of Defense of Slovenia, former member of European Parliament and member of Slovenian Parliament before that. Roman is joining us from Ljubljana, and thank you once again for accepting our invitation and having time for us. And one of our co-hosts, I would say, because this webinar is possible because of Friedrich Naumann Stiftung support, Sebastian Wacht, who is joining us from Hamburg, but he works from Brussels, actually, under the normal circumstances, in normal times, at the Brussels office of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation as the head of their security hub. Thank you, Sebastian.
Thanks for having me, Timothy.
Thank you. So the very first question I want to start this discussion with is kind of a statement we hear these days most often, probably. Lots of people say all over the world, actually, everywhere on media, you will hear people, experts, or public officials saying that the world is not going to be the same as we knew it before. So that will be the start of discussion I offer to you as well. What does it mean? Do you agree with it? You disagree? What is the world we expect to be after the crisis is over, or the first phase, as they say, of the crisis is over? What are the main challenges? What are the problems that we are facing? How we will address those challenges, and where we will be after we go out to our normal job places, how we start, what we do as the very first thing that needs to be done. Teddo, as representing host city of this webinar, I would ask you to start this discussion, and then we go from there.
Thank you very much, Tina. Thank you very much for initiating, arranging, this, I would say, for me, and I hope, for all of us staying home, we have much time, maybe for the first time in my life and in your lives. And it's very important for us to talk, discuss, find out, discuss some ideas, find out options. And I remember, I was thinking before joining this, distinguished panel, how much I loved, and I think not only me, how much I loved this famous, Chinese curse, I wish you to live in the interesting times. And we used it half jokingly, half seriously, this kind of idiom metaphor. And I'm just thinking about that this Chinese, metaphor, I wish you to live in the interesting times, kind of Chinese curse, turned into the reality now. So indeed, we live in the interesting times, which I would say these are indeed, rough times, indeed rough times. A lot of things are going on, and we witness, not only worldwide public health disaster, but the disaster that transformed into global political crisis of, I would say, almost of biblical, proportions. And as Tina just posed very interesting question, the way she posed it, and we can talk, and we have been talking much about this, pandemic, coronavirus, but we do not know yet how long this crisis, will last, how bad it is. We are watching, daily, in the evenings and sometimes at nights, TV channels, but we do not know what's going on. But we know that when coronavirus pandemic, I hope, is over, we would live in a different world. There is no doubt for me. I do not expect, by the way, this total change of whatever we call globalization or world order and so on. But within this, formats, there would be quite drastic, dramatic, changes. But unfortunately, at least, countries like Georgia, sitting here in Tbilisi, we do not know yet what we should anticipate, because we do not know what's going on yet. We do not know what this virus is about, though we learned a lot of things about that, but it's more than virus. It's, as I said, it's about, changes on a global, scale. And if Mr. Fukuyama, whom Sasha, Wondra, and I met when we were ambassadors in Washington Times, if Mr. Fukuyama speaks about the end of the history, now we hear that coronavirus, according to Richard Haas, may or would accelerate the history. So we are supposed to live, and we're going to live indeed, in the interesting times. And I think, that's why what Tina initiated, what Tina arranged is very important. Talking, discussing, exchanging views, because we need to learn a lot of things.
Thank you, Teddo. And just to go from where you ended, is it really an end of history as we knew it? Is it something as dramatic as world has never seen? Or we will just go as business as usual after all of that? And any of you, please pick up.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was somehow challenged by Tito. So look, first of all, hello. I'm sitting not in Prague, but in Leitmeritz. Litomyasice is a small, beautiful medieval district town in northwestern Bohemia, where I am home, and I'm working now. We are in the lockdown since March 12th, so it's already a month. But the last couple of days, we are already starting to think how to lift at least some of the bans, so we can walk to the forest, to the nature. So it's not a complete shutdown. And what to tell to that? You know, I think the world would never be the same as before. It's will be same in many aspects and will be different as we can now see, because this is proof. I think that this conversation is a proof of coming back to certain normality. So we are working. For example, the next 2 days, we will have the remote session of the European Parliament plenary with voting by email. So it's different, but it's also the same. So I think what is the problem? You know, this kind of a pandemic is nothing new under the sun. There were the plagues in the medieval age. We have, you know, 100 years ago, we had the experience with Spanish flu. They all were pandemics by nature. They all originated somehow in China. And what is new, in fact, is this totally switch off. That's a novelty. This total shutdown, it has never occurred before. Switching of the economy. So it tells us something about the current stage of the civilization and the West, I would say in particular. First, this paradox, which is acute more than anywhere before, is that we, on one hand, we have the huge capacity to kill, but on the other hand, we have almost no will to sacrifice our lives. You know, and we have to think seriously. Those total lockdowns and those who did it on time, better than the others. So from this perspective, so for example,
I don't hear Alexander.
Yeah, I think it's there is a technical problem. Alexander, can you hear us?
This virus, without having a vaccine, without having medicine, will be here with us for a year or two, and we'll have to cope with that without locking down everything, because you know you can lock down the economy for a month, but not for 4 or 5 months. So that's one paradox, and the second paradox is that, you know, we, the Western world, have a strong feeling about the strengths of our values, but the fact is, as many has, I would say, pointed out in the last couple of weeks, that in the crisis like this, it's not just about the values, it's about proper management from above. It's about the will of the people to behave properly in the situation like this. And I think in both ways, both from above and from below, the West has to seriously think what to do to be able to compete with Asia. So those are, I think, two issues. The world will be different on many aspects. So more homework, more using the technology, but that's same for everybody. But I think to fix those two, to solve those two paradoxes which I mentioned, it's really a challenge for us.
Thank you very much. Anybody who wants to add, or we can move to other questions?
If
Teddo.
Yeah, if I may, again, I fully would agree, with, Sasha Vondra, whatever he said and admitted. And as I said, earlier, that I do not expect drastic, changes in global affairs. I hope, but on the other hand, what this coronavirus pandemic, just presented to all of us is that it highlighted, and Sasha talked about the properly managing, this crisis. It highlighted existing problems, risks, threats, institutional ones, and especially for countries like Georgia, and I'm sitting here in Tbilisi or any place of Georgia, and I remember, that's why I recall, our meetings in Washington with Ambassador Sasha Vondra, but we talked about Georgia's perspectives, aspirations, our Western trajectory, European Union, NATO, and whatever. But this pandemic, somehow highlighted these problems, institutional, whatever we're watching and hearing and reading, So I think in this regard, how to say that pandemic is sometimes, useful, but in this regard, we need, because for countries like Georgia, we need, strong Europe, we need strong United States of America, strong NATO, European Union. But whatever we sometimes, watch on TV or read or hear from European or American leaders, I wouldn't say that Georgians panic, but we wish, at least sitting in Tbilisi here in Georgia, better management, to see better management of this global pandemic.
Thank you, Teddo. And I want to pick up on what you were saying about the institutional problems, and I want to move to edwinas. If you can share with us the experience or vision from Vilnius as to the institutional setup as we have it today, how durable it is, how flexible it was in tackling the crisis that emerged basically suddenly out of nowhere, both from internal point of view in democratic countries, how the democracies managed, like Lithuania or Slovenia, Germany, Czech Republic, managed to tackle this problem domestically, as well as from NATO and European Union side, how strong, in one voice, united are European Union and NATO in responding to this crisis. Do we see any weak links within those institutions? Do we see any problems with the unity as we knew it before in those institutions? So if you can address the issue, and all the panelists, obviously, from both points of view, domestically, how democracies were ready, whether they were ready or not, for dealing with the problems emerged out of the crisis, and in a broader sense, European Union and NATO being resilient and capable of dealing with it.
Thank you, Tina, for the perfect question. So I can take 2 hours now to answer it, because it starts from here and somewhere else. I'll try to be, very close in my answers. You are very right. I'm working in a technological security field, especially digital security, cybersecurity. I'll give you some insights, what I see, not from human perspective, which is coronavirus, I mean diseases, death, and hospitals and so on, but from technological perspective. And to be very honest, 1 month ago, we had a lot of digital challenges, including threats coming from criminals and countries that would like to find new ways to do espionage on their opponents and use very sophisticated tools like viruses, like social engineering, like psychological attacks on our citizens, on our governmental bodies, and all our infrastructure. And those challenges did not go anywhere, but they increased dramatically. Lithuania is one of the fastest internet-based countries in the world, but our workflow now is 80% of our internet speed. Why? Because everything moved to digital. Every child in my country is now sitting at home and learning online. Even if they did not know what Zoom was or Microsoft Teams, even if they did not have any computer at home, they were quickly provided by those technologies in 2 weeks. And now my children are working upstairs with Office 365. They already know what cloud is, what Zoom is, what various online tests are, and they study at home. Meaning that on one hand, we have a lot of dangers or challenges coming because people moved to kitchens like Sebastian is sitting and Roman with their computers that might be full of business information. So it is a threat because I'm not very sure that your IT departments were well prepared to move you quickly out. But on one hand, we have an excellent opportunity to do a shift, to do a technological shift, and after the crisis come out with new competences, new skills, and be a little bit in advance. But coming back to challenges, you're very right. Our opponents are looking for opportunities. They are doing espionage because in our smartphones, we're using apps. We do have digital signatures. We have emails, contacts, everything. I don't need a computer because all my life is in my phone, right? So if someone, a bad guy, manages to get that information out of my phone, I'm in a trouble. And believe me, some countries are so much interested nowadays in doing espionage online or virtually or digitally as you wish, that they don't need old-fashioned embassy-based spies that world recently sent out of those embassies, including the United States and Lithuania and many other countries, because they found out a better way how to get information out of our equipment. As an example, I'll provide you some investigations recently we did. For example, Yandex is a huge Russian company like Google in the United States, and we are pretty sure they're doing espionage not only on their own citizens, but on other countries' citizens, including European Union countries. For example, they have Yandex taxi application, very similar to other taxi applications. And after our investigation, we found out that it gets access to everything what is in your phone, everything, including secure storage, social accounts, passwords, emails, SMSs, contacts, everything. More, they send this information out of the EU to Russia. So everything that is in your phone goes out of it. Let's take another example, Wi-Fi router. We are all now connected to wireless networks doing this Zoom presentation. And recently we found out one of manufacturers selling equipment that was created in Russia, although it's a Taiwanese company, which is unsecure by design. And again, all your traffic, all information, where you browse, what you do, goes directly to Russia. So digital espionage is a problem number one nowadays, from my perspective, because people 1 month ago did not care about their personal security. Now challenges are even more higher because we took out our business information. We went to our kitchens, bedrooms, whatever else, places, and we work online. Although we do not care about our personal security, but we don't care about our business security. So these are main challenges what I see. And although last year, talking about democracies, we had 3 elections in my country. My responsibility and my team's responsibility was physically protect cyberspace, so those democracy elements would not face any security challenges. And we found thousands attempts to break into our systems that were directly connected with elections. So this threat will not go anywhere because our opponents want to get into democracy elements, and especially in digital elements, because now even more of processes that were previously done manually are moved to digital. And talking about answer from EU or NATO, I would expand it to even more, to, for example, bilateral cooperation, like we do with Georgia, Ukraine, and United States. It's my personal idea that we need to join our forces. And now in Kaunas, second largest city, we are finalizing the concept of cyber competence center, where those 4 countries will be fighting and defending our cyberspace together. Which means that alone, nowadays, you are in a huge trouble. You need partners, and not only EU partners, where again we have tools, because at the beginning of this year, a new program started, which is called Cyber Rapid Response Teams, that are already operational, and it's again our own Lithuanian concept adopted to European Union and the PESCO framework. And guys and girls that physically are sitting in different countries are ready to quickly respond to huge cyber challenges and physically move to an incident place. And I'm not talking about informational challenges, propaganda challenges that all social networks are full of, and those narratives that EU or NATO are not able to, deal with coronavirus, and that they are bad guys, growing extraordinary. But on another hand, they're doing propaganda in their own country, saying how they are doing well, right, with the same challenge, because they hide everything. But look, EU and NATO and other countries are doing badly. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, ედვინას, for this comment. Sebastian was asking for intervention. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Tina. Yeah, I just wanted to add to you, ედვინას, by presuming that this crisis is probably providing us with one advantage and one disadvantage when it comes to tackling those challenges that you just mentioned. One thing, and this relates to one of the basic questions of this discussion, I guess, is how does the crisis affect the power dynamics in the world? And I would like to agree with Teddo that it probably doesn't change anything. It only highlights and amplifies what has been there before. And that means that in hard power terms, the United States and the West and Europe are probably going to lose in comparison to China and maybe also to Russia. Because as it looks now, the COVID-19 crisis has hit the United States and Europe harder than China, not only in terms of infections, but also economically. Which means that there will just be less resources available and less room for maneuver in the budgets. So since we have invested heavily into the economy today, we need to save a lot tomorrow. And then it's very likely that we find at the very top of our budget, or in second or third, the defense budget, which is comparatively high in the United States and in most European countries. So it's very likely that the spending priorities may change and that we will stop to raise our defense budgets as we've agreed on in NATO, and that we may even see a decline of defense expenditure in absolute terms. So that I know I'm in the company here of some current and former defense ministers. Your departments are very likely to lose funding in the future in Europe and in the United States, I'm afraid, which ironically may still get us closer to the infamous 2% of defense expenditure in NATO, because our GDPs are going to serve, but still relatively to maybe Russia and China, we may lose. So this, I'm afraid, may be a problem. But on the other hand, and this very much relates to what edwinас just said, to all those hybrid and cyber threats, fortunately, we can observe in many Western countries now that people regain trust into institutions like science, media, non-populist parties. So it seems now as if people only trust populists when they can afford to do so, when they're not in crisis. And now we see that renaissance of traditional institutions, and that I hope may help us to become more resilient in the future to fight disinformation, maybe also to become more competent in cyber and to defend ourselves better against such threats. I don't know if you agree with that, edwinás, but this is at least the silver lining of hope that I see in this current crisis.
Sebastian, you're very right. I will give you one example. Neuronical networks or intelligence tools that we already use in Lithuania for many years to fight against disinformation became so much popular, and we provided not only to EU, to our partners, but even to such organizations like NATO, which means that understanding is coming that you need to fight modern threats with modern tools. Now, not with guns, but with artificial intelligence, with such next generation technologies that are already available in such countries like Lithuania.
Roman, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to this eminent panel of the experts. I just would like to go back to what Alexander was saying, that some things will change and some things will be completely different. And we are already started to talk about, I don't know, positive things like the digitalization of our life and how to use the digital age for, let's say, education, etc., etc. But it's also, you know, negative sides. But to be honest, it is a little bit difficult to understand that we were not prepared for this, because, you know, Corona, no matter what majority of the leaders saying to avoid the responsibility for unfolding catastrophe, Corona was predicted. I mean, you know, we had SARS, MERS, Ebola in some countries, and we learned from them. For example, 15 years ago, the World Health Organization revised and upgraded the global framework for responding to the outbreaks after they learned the lecture from the SARS outbreak in 2003. And also, for example, in 2016, the World Bank launched a so-called pandemic emergency financial facility to provide assistance to low-income countries in the face of cross-border health crisis. So, and you know, also in NATO, we have the mechanisms, etc., but we are always at EU as well. But we are always find ourselves in the situation that we are somehow surprised. We were surprised with the migration crisis in 2013. We didn't do nothing till now. I mean, now we are more talking about the COVID-19 than the migration, but the problem is still there. So we don't have this, let's say, global response to some of the things which are happening around us. So this is one. So what I'm missing in all this story is how it is that we are asking ourselves, like Edwin was also asking, and I was asking when I was the Minister of Defense, how we are not prepared for all these new threats, security threats, which are in front of us. And the second thing, due to the fact that I'm more, let's say, politician than the experts I mean, I served all my life in the parliament, government. It's what concerns me is basically what's going on while we are fighting the coronavirus, and that, you know, that while, I don't know, the global health crisis would typically bring world leaders and countries together to join forces and promote cooperation and solidarity. The coronavirus outbreaks has demonstrated the opportunism of some political leaders to use this exceptional situation to harden authoritarian system, and basically started to devastate the liberal democratic values of liberal democracy. So this is also, and I'm not talking just the Donald Trump using the coronavirus outbreak to extend his xenophobical discourse. I'm not talking just about Brazil, where companies have been allowed to not to pay their workers during the time of crisis. China, we all know, has started disinformation campaign and covering up the real number of corona cases in Russia. We all know what's going on there, targeted disinformation campaigns and creating the confusions, and normally building distrust in Europe and the international institution. But all things are also happening much closer to home. So, you know, Hungary, Viktor Orban has been using the coronavirus outbreak to weaken institutions and basically expand his executive power. We are not far away from Slovenia, by the way, where when we locked down Slovenia on the 12th of March, we got a new government, which is a right-oriented government with Prime Minister Janez Janša, who is one of the best friends of Viktor Orban, who is basically on the line of Orban, Kaczynski, Salvini, Le Pen in that respect, and who also try to do, to change, let's say, this liberal democratic values which we fight for decades, to change over the night, covering it with the fight against the coronavirus. So this is also an aspect which I would like to hear what you think, and I would like to discuss it also, how to, let's say, avoid, because as I was I just prepared the quotation of Danny Roderick, professor of international political economy of Harvard University, John F. Kennedy School of Government, who said, I quote, "Don't expect the pandemic to reverse tendency evident before the crisis. Populist autocrats will become even more authoritarian."
Thank you, Roman, for bringing that issue, because it was pretty interesting that when I asked the question about the institutional readiness and how both domestic and international multilateral institutions were ready and proved to be durable during the crisis, immediately the discussion jumped into the high-tech and digital world, which I can completely understand, and we all sitting here in Zoom and having this online conversation obviously proves the facts, the importance and the urgency of digitalization of our everyday lives. But still, is there a room for some conventional institutions? Is there a room for liberal democratic setup as we knew it before the digital world, or together with the digital world? What about yes, absolutely, the propaganda machinery that is working out there, both Chinese, Russian, and not exclusive to both those two countries. We like quoting them most of the time, but unfortunately, it's not limited to only those two. What about as Roman mentioned at the end, what about the tendencies of autocracies? What about those leaders who will be and are already ready to use, and we see we are watching Viktor Orban's actions, decisions, activities out there in Hungary. We just got a question from Zurab Gorgodze, who was asking the similar thing about far-right movements who are now a little bit more silent than before, but definitely will be using this opportunity once they will get a chance to get even more active than they were before and prove their point once again. Is there any need? And we were talking in the beginning about the world not being the same as before. Does it mean that there is a need for the total change in the democratic institutional setup as we know it after the Second World War? Is it non-responsive? Is it outdated? And the only thing we need to care is how secure are our internet platforms, how digital world is working. Do we need to move democracy into the digital world, or there is still room for some conventional methods and conventional setups as we knew it? Is the coronavirus crisis somehow challenging everything that we were doing before in terms of the democratic institution building and democratic reforms, other than moving to the digital world?
Tina, if I may, very briefly to follow up, what our friends, were talking about, and you just, mentioned, because the issue of democracy during this pandemic is democracy for a country like Georgia is very important, as everybody knows, but democracy within this pandemic and how it works and functions, it's very important for me. Okay, it's obvious now, there is no doubt for us that this pandemic made huge changes within societies, psychologies of people, individuals, the families. It's obvious. We live, as we agree, in different world, and it's obvious. So I'm watching in a very careful way, this process, because I'm really very much afraid that this phrase, this terminology for security reasons, which people, authorities, governments, presidents use, may damage, what we used to call, democratic, fabrics, freedoms, individual freedoms, institutional, capacity, because using this word for security reasons, they can anytime, any day, they can, just, put different, restraints on the democratic process. So I think we need to be careful, and there's a lot of questions I would appreciate if I would hear answers, because I read somewhere that pandemic brought along new notions, coronavirus autocracy. People are using, and you mentioned, what Prime Minister Orban has been doing, and not only him. So how democracy functions, or is supposed to function in the times where everybody is, in, and how civil society, we're in a lockdown, sitting in our apartments and houses and wherever, but at the same time, has it damaged, this lockdown damaged democratic, process, or will damage? I think it's very important for us to know, and how should we operate? How you just mentioned Georgian Parliament. I agree fully with you. Instead of being active and at the same time effective, especially during these days, Parliament disappeared. So how these institutions, democratic institutions, function during this very troubled, I would say, time.
Yeah, please do, Roman.
Sorry, just to follow the question of His Excellency Ambassador, what is particular to the coronavirus pandemic is that one of the most obvious ways to protest against government is disabling. I mean, we are all sitting home. So when Putin announced changes to the constitution, demonstrations could be prohibited because they would allow the virus to spread. And also, as the case when Orban does away with elections, he can say that social distancing is compatible with the procedure that calls for everyone to come to the same place on the same day. So what can we do in that respect is that in functioning democracies, and you mentioned parliaments, and I'm parliamentarian for all my life. I served 4 mandates in the parliament. The parliaments and the courts normally have to keep working. And also, if business and academia can shift online, like we are trying to shift through this, there is no reason why this institution cannot conduct this distance democracy. But a parliament, which have been losing power to executives anyway in the recent decades, and especially now after at least in my part of the world, since the beginning of March, they should accept a selective rule by decree only for a restricted, limited time, and only under the some in the situation which rule by that this is not taking too long. I mean, you have some examples in the countries where they're including the parliament, like New Zealand, where normally parliament cannot do, but they put it the opposition to the committee, which is the big committee, to be some kind of control and to basically to work. So I fully agree with His Excellency Ambassador saying that we should keep democracy going on, because if not, then at least in the countries where let's say the tendency of extreme right or extreme left, if you want, in power, will do the work very easy.
I think that here we will all agree that we need to keep democracy going on, but we have a question from Turkish ambassador to Georgia, for example, as to how can the West prompt, for example, Russian geopolitical opportunism in conflict areas in the countries where they claim dominance, or China's creeping in the Black Sea region in Balkans, how we keep democracies going on in these difficult times, especially not only due to domestic problems, but especially due to those influences that we are facing from adversaries. And edwinas was asking for the floor.
Yeah, well, what I want to say that I don't see any reason why we should turn something off. And it doesn't matter, we talk about parliament or government or municipalities, because we all, I mean all the world, we all have tools available to be operational. In Lithuania, every municipality is active. Yes, they cannot come physically to the building, or government cannot be physically in one room, but we have online tools that we successfully use in my country. They previously said, but we need a voting option. We said, okay, here you are. This is a security-based voting system. Please use it. So keep on going, keep on taking decisions, keep on discussing. Don't let the world or situation to stop. And we are running. Yes, of course, there are less activities concerning foreign affairs or outside country issues, but inside the country, you have all possibilities to be fully operational. And there is no doubt about that. Even as I mentioned at the beginning, schools, you don't need to close them. Put them online. All tools are available. And it does not cost much, but it gives you a huge value. Even if you have hours for a 2 or 3 weeks period, afterwards, you will see that your children left online school being more smart, efficient, and again, gaining those necessary news that regularly they get it at school. So I would suggest us all to look for opportunities, but not to stay, closed at home. I'm staying at home already for 3 months because I had a huge injury, and my work did not stop. Even lying in hospital, I was operational. My activities did not stop for any day. And everything is possible, even when you are responsible for cybersecurity of whole country. Believe me, all is possible.
Well, thank you for that optimism. I will take just a couple of minutes to add what Teddo was saying, and I think I've said before, we've started this discussion about how those democratic institutions gave up on ruling in my country, because, well, what edwinas was saying, it automatically means that there is a room for the discussion, right? We can take a floor, we can take a stance, we can take initiative online, but if those who are, at the end of the day, decision makers, who are on the other side of the line to hear, to listen, to make decisions, they are absent. In case of country Georgia, we have Parliament of Georgia basically, literally speaking, refusing to perform its constitutional duties. They are not in session. They refuse to take part in any decision making. They gave all their powers to rule, to govern, and gave it all to the prime minister, who on his behalf refused to rule the country in a constitutional manner, because there is no Security Council ever meeting, ever taking any decisions, ever consulting with the institutions as it is in our laws. But we are ruled by one man called Prime Minister of Georgia, who time to time calls on the people he feels important and necessary to consult with, to discuss with. Those usually are the doctors or medical scientists, and then comes out on the press conference and informs us about the decisions he took. So I completely understand that we do need, and I share your optimism, we do need to see opportunity in every challenge that we are facing. Otherwise, we will just give up and do nothing. But at the same time, I think that depending on how strong democracy is and how strong accountability of the government is in a given country, those challenges vary and the problems vary. And facing them, unfortunately, brings lots of challenges for ordinary human beings. So this is why we need all these experiences. This is why we need to hear how it works in other democracies and how you tackle those issues in your countries. So Teddo, I think you were asking for the floor. And
I just want just briefly, Tina, because I really care about democracy, and specifically democracy in my country, Georgia, as you and many, many others. And I'd like to react to the question from the distinguished Turkish ambassador, our good friend, and very active and very efficient an ambassador, by the way. How at this moment of pandemic, how we still should keep this democratic process in a part of the world which is where all these notions, stability, security, whatever, including now cyber security, economic development, prosperity, cooperation, sovereignty, independence, all these elements are intertwined, interconnected, and interdependent. We cannot, say that one country is, perfect and another one is not. Everything is interconnected. So whenever we speak about, democracy and democratic, process, of course, how to deal with this, issue is very important. So how to activate, civil society? Yes, we are, as we agree, all we are in a lockdown, but at the same time, democracy should go on. Democracy, you cannot stop, democracy. So, but again, it depends. You just talked about that it's not enough. For example, if you open parliament and make decisions, at the end of the day, decisions are implemented by the other side. But I think in this regard, if we speak about Georgia, we should activate, parliament. Parliament should become, active, efficient, effective. I understand. There should be no democratic, discourse, debates, discussions, and that's how it happens, and activate, civil society the way we exist, now. Yeah, it's not easy, but at the same time, do not stop democracy. And speaking about, region and the question from Turkish ambassador, of course, we need, leadership. We live in a neighborhood where we have, one neighbor which does not want, for example, neither Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, or all former Soviet republics, relatively strong, be relatively democratic. They prefer, weakness due to obvious, reasons and well-known reasons for us. But at the same time, there are other, countries in this part of the world, including, Turkey, including, members of NATO and European Union, Romania, for example. And then we need, this leadership. We need, as people say, and Sasha Vondra, and I remember wonderful, especially just brilliant person, Paul Gobel, whose famous phrase was, think the unthinkable. That's the time. Now we need to think the unthinkable. And that's the way how we need to live. We live in a different world. So we need to,
Yeah, thank you, Teddo. Roman was asking for the floor, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree that it is the different, normally, due to the fact that we are living in different societies and different democracies. But this coronavirus basically shown us how this difference looked from the perspective of the citizen watching what the power is doing. So, by the way, in Slovenia, thanks God, our parliament is still working and also trying to, let's say, to limit the ambitions of government, in the sense, for example, government wanted to give the police powers to the military, and the parliament refused that, etc., etc. But what I wanted to say is that, in lockdowns around the globe, we can see two different phases of governments, or those who are speaking to us. One, which is speaking with motivationally, like if I look to Ireland, how they address the issue, or if I look, somebody who spread the fear, and I will not go to Orban again, but I will go back to my country, to Slovenia, where basically what they were telling to the people in the different crises, like migration crisis, when they were trying to spread the fear, they are spreading the fear about the coronavirus now in the way that they are using even the military terminology. It is, they're talking about the war, they're talking about the enemy, they're talking about, in that context, you can find, the heavily attack on the free media also in Slovenia, because whoever asks the normal question, is accused to be, enemy of this, holy war we are fighting against the coronavirus. So this is the difference, and what I'm trying to say is that I'm afraid that this, even, and hopefully when coronavirus will gone, it will continue. I mean, this this environment of pressure, of fear, of people not asking, and for example, when in Slovenia, when they changed when the government changed, suddenly all the experts, doctors, epidemiologists, infectologists, and they just disappeared from the TV, from the radio, and suddenly just the politicians are talking to the people what's going on. So, in this situation, this I don't like, and I'm worried about what it will be after the coronavirus will gone, and we will basically stay in the environment which will be hostile to us.
Thank you, Roman. I think Alexander was asking.
Maybe a couple of comments what I have heard. Number one, civil society, as Teddo has mentioned. In fact, just measuring what I have seen in my own country, it's a renaissance of the civil society. The fact that we are successful in containing the first part of this crisis is not just because of the early lockdown decided from above, but mostly because of a fantastic activity from below. For example, I just can mention two examples. The issue of the masks, because there was everywhere was the shortages of those equipments, and we were dependent on the deliveries from China. But regarding this normal mask, it was the people from below who started to produce them at home, and simply in the matter of a week, equipped every citizen. So it's a 10 million nation to wear them in the public. So, and did it voluntarily from the beginning, because there were young people in the internet who were explaining that wearing the mask, it's not protect himself, but the other with whom I am communicating. So it's a it's in fact a humanitarian activity. The second example, the various startups are mushrooming in producing the very sophisticated medical equipment, because as a way how to break the shortage. So in fact, I see so much from the civil society as I have never seen in the last 20 years. So it's a good news. Secondly, I think, look, we all are making our professions by talking. That's what makes our money. Although this is a free of charge today. But we need to, I think that the key problem is to restart the economic activity. Otherwise, we will wake up one day and will recognize that there is a huge power redistribution in the world to the disadvantage of the West. I think Sebastian has already mentioned that, and I would even underline this as a must. And it must be done in a way that, we would not kill the competitive environment, neither in Europe nor in the West. If everything would be just run by the state, it would be ineffective. You would have a problem. And it brings me to the third area, and that's a democracy. In fact, the term of war has been used by Emmanuel Macron for the first time, not by Orban. But our problem is there is no leadership at all. In our conversation, Viktor Orban has been mentioned 10 times. Nobody mentioned Merkel, nobody mentioned Macron, Trump was mentioned just once, nobody mentioned Johnson, nobody mentioned Spanish Prime Minister, who was leading the country into 1 million rally just before outbreak of the coronavirus, despite the warnings from the expert, and it caused simply to cause the current Spanish mess. And I think, you know, we need to be fair. I am not the admirer of Viktor Orban, but in fact, one of the few parliament which was in session last week was Hungarian. So just study this more in the detail. Don't repeat just, you know, if we are in a situation that the Western Europe is right now in a bigger mess than in a Central Europe, just don't finger pointing the others. I think that the problem of the West, it's just finger pointing the others instead of doing maximum for re-energizing itself or regaining its strength. And we will have the problem because Sebastian has already mentioned the issue of the resources for NATO. We will have a difficult debate inside the European Union because of the economic issues like the Corona bonds and others. And if we are not going to fix that, we will have the problem with the institutions which we would terribly need for our economy as well as power recovery.
Thank you, Alexander. Yes, Sebastian, I will come to you immediately. Just I want to hear some of the questions from the audience, and you might also pick on them while responding. We have a question from a very good colleague of ours, Emil Grias, asking, is China the new great security threat to the Western democracies that will unite the Euro-Atlantic community, given all the lies and disinformation on the starts of the epidemics and the figures? And in that sense, we are going to see greater Russia-China cooperation in promoting authoritarian societies based on mass surveillance or of their own citizens. If both, yes, how to deal with regimes like Orban, which are inside NATO and European Union and would side Russia and China. And on the similar note, there is another question from Tornike Siramua asking about the new geopolitics after the COVID-19. He says that we don't know what will be the end of it, but let me still ask your opinion regarding the post-corona geopolitical situation in terms of the conflicts and security, Syria, US-Iran relations, and in what kind of geopolitical shape we might live. So those will be two questions, Sebastian. And there are much more we'll go to.
I'm sitting here in Hamburg in my girlfriend's kitchen, but normally I would be in Brussels, so I feel that it's my task to say something pro-European, and that relates to your statement, Alexander, and also to Emil's question. As we've already pretty much agreed on, is that this crisis doesn't change the world, but it amplifies and highlights things that were there before, which is the decline of the United States leadership, the rise of China, the transatlantic rift, and the need for European action. One of the most shocking things to see in this crisis is the total absence of US leadership, or even the opposite. I mean, United States have not only not offered any leadership, they have overbid Europeans when it came to procuring medical equipment. As we've learned this morning, frozen funding to the World Health Organization. They've totally retracted into a America First self-isolation position. And whereas China is actually offering leadership, and that's maybe a way of leadership that we don't like, but they are offering leadership. They are sending medical experts to Italy. They are shipping medical equipment to Europe. There's talk about a health Silk Road and so on. So China is actually trying to be seen after the crisis by the international community as a savior in this crisis rather than a culprit. And it remains to be seen if they succeed at doing that. It would be speculation to say if they will succeed or not. But at least they have a huge opportunity to take some of that soft power leadership that the United States has just ceded. And we know already now some of your countries cooperate closely with China in a 17+1 format.
Germany cooperates much more than us.
All right, yeah, maybe even Germany, you're right. The economic ties are very close. So there is a vacuum created by the United States, and we're all looking to that November elections in the United States, and we're all hoping that it's going to be Joe Biden and not Donald Trump. But we don't know. We don't know if there can be a restart in transatlantic partnership or not. We just don't know. And so we should take this crisis as a final reminder that there's an absolute need for more European action. And when I say European, I intentionally do not only mean the European Union, but I also include Georgia and those other European countries who are not yet members of the European Union. But there's an absolute need for European action in this dynamic.
Thank you, Sebastian. We have only 15 minutes left, and I really want to address some of the questions from the audience. Also, just to announce the next round of these talks that we've initiated exactly the same time next Wednesday. And Emil, I want to invite you as a panelist for the next round. Will be about China. So all who are interested on talking, discussing the issues of China as emerging, whatever we call it, under the current circumstances, please join us and share your opinions and questions with us. So next Wednesday we will be talking exclusively about China. There are lots of questions about Georgia and under the current circumstances, Georgia's NATO opportunities, whether they're increasing, decreasing, Georgia European Union cooperation, whether there is more chance, less chance, chances are disappearing. There are questions about how these coronaviruses are going to affect the conflicts that exist in our parts of the world. There is a question from Georgi Kanashvili addressed to Mr. Jafarიძე. Do you see any possibility of any positive influence of the virus on Georgia, Abkhaz, or Georgian Ossetian relations? How sufficient are Georgian government's initiatives towards this issue? And I would add to this question, if not, what else? What will be your insight to what can be done in these difficult times for confidence building, peace building, more trust developing during the crisis times with the conflict regions?
If I may, I'd like to start from another, just question, just colleagues discussed. Not colleagues, but I started saying that we need, leadership, and that Georgia's, foreign policy trajectory has not changed due to coronavirus or whatever, and wouldn't change. It's obvious. But I think and I agree with you that we need more resolution and speaking about leadership from European Union and America. We do not want to, just, in the middle of this, squabbles and disagreements between the European Union and the United States. We need, both, as I admitted earlier, strong, resolute, and engaged in global affairs. And as for Georgia, I think Georgia needs to continue, despite this whatever troubles we're in. Georgia needs to continue its, capacity state building, process. But in a parallel regime, with democracy. It cannot be, strong state first, and then let's think about democracy after. We need to do it, in a parallel way, and it's, I think in this regard, I think we are in a very unique, situation, because we need to accomplish, state, society consolidation in Georgia, make Georgian political state institutions strong, active, efficient, effective, and make Georgia again. I'm thinking we're talking about Georgia within this pandemic, but also we need to start thinking in a very resolute, very effective way right now about post-corona virus, period, and especially, Georgia's economy and how to make Georgia a useful state, because we appreciate that throughout these 30 years of Georgia's independence and sovereignty, the West, provided Georgia a huge amount of assistance, the United States of America, European Union. But on the other hand, at the same time, Georgia also needs to offer to the Western community its capacity. So in this regard, Tina mentioned at the beginning, as far as I remember, Port of Anaklia, which we were building, and I hope Georgia would build this port on the east shores of the Black Sea. I think Port of Anaklia and these kind of things are not only about containers, infrastructure, delivering cargo from point A up to point Z, but it's about Georgia's kind of value, and that's the capacity Georgia can offer to the Western community, and making a country like Georgia a useful partner to our friends in the United States of America, and the European Union, and in Europe in general. And of course, we should think, answering this last question, Tina, we should think about Abkhazia and Sindwali region, or South Ossetia, whatever we call, and not only about territories, which are integrated parts for us at least, but also people, Ossetians, Abkhazians, because they're going through this very troubled times as well. If there is any way to help, if there is any way to assist them, and I think there are some things that are going on, but we should do, because it's about these are citizens of Georgia. Let's say it that way.
Absolutely. There is a question about 5G. I don't know if any of you wants to pick up on this. The question goes like, what's the objective behind the hysteria being sold concerning G5 network by Russian disinformation campaigns? Question comes from Georgia, from Nodar Tangiashvili. Any thoughts about it? Edwinas,
I can take it, yes.
Yep.
5G is probably on every government's table, the question which is very important. As we today talked already, that a lot of activities are moving to digital, meaning we are more and more dependent on technologies and on infrastructure that those technologies run on. 5G is an opportunity for countries that don't have very good wired networks under the ground, meaning huge data should be passed through those networks. From one side, it seems that it's just normal technological or economical question, but on another side, it's a fully security question. Because imagine what would happen if at the moment electricity would go out and all internet connections would be cut down. What would your government, military, police, hospitals should do? Nothing. For example,
the question, what's worse than COVID-19?
I'll give you an example. In my country, approximately 90% of medical information is in digital. I don't have paper book. No, everything about me that my doctor receives is in digital. So what would happen if today my country's hospitals would be cut off internet connection? People might die. A lot of people might die because doctors would even not be possible to see what my blood is, what diseases I'm ill with, what medicaments I should take, and so on. How can they do surgery? That's why in my country, Ministry of Defense is responsible to provide network to critical infrastructure of the government. It's my duty to interconnect all hospitals, police stations, customs, and other governmental institutions, and provide 24/7 security and physical connection. because we rely on those networks. So when we come back to 5G, so if I have equipment from country that has ability to get into this equipment, because there is a special law that says you must provide access to my special forces in case I need to, so I'm in trouble. Because one day I will lose control of this special network that I'm responsible in my country. So how can I rely on company that has such close ties with government, with special agencies, and I'm not even talking about crisis time or wartime. Someone of you said that some governments say bad things, fear about military stuff and so on. But for example, me living on an eastern border of NATO, of EU, I need to think about worst scenario. Because in my country, we know well how it is easy to lose independence. It just takes like this. And you need a lot of years, 50 years, like we did, to restore our independence. So I don't want to lose my independence again. I want my children live in a free country, democratical country that is part of the world, that is part of EU and NATO. And I want to rely on technologies and equipment that comes from my partners that I rely on, but not from countries that, you know, you cannot trust.
Thank you, Edwinas. And probably one last question comes from Gibi Gigitashvili, Atlantic Council DFRL Lab. We see that many countries around the world started to monitor people's mobility through warning and tracing mobile applications. The main justification of such move is that it helps prevent public authority in their efforts to contain the spread of the virus. Is there any pan-European approach on the use of mobile applications in the European Union, and how public can ensure that governments have exit strategy at place after COVID-19 crisis is over? There are lots of questions about the exit strategy, so maybe
I can also take this question. A couple of years ago in EU, we did not care about personal data. We did not care about anything. We were providing those data to everyone, companies, businesses, apps, whatever. But from the moment when GDPR was adopted in all EU, it became very strict. So when government wants to track or deal with personal data, they need to follow very strict requirements, and you cannot do what you want with that data. Yes, previously we were installing, for example, Angry Birds, and no one even asked why it is free. Is someone doing program job on Angry Birds, creating an app, and it does not cost any cent? Because my personal data 2 years ago was going out to business who were buying my activities, what I'm interested in, what I'm searching for, where I eat, what I order, and so on and so on. Now in EU, it is so strict that you cannot do what you want with personal data. And yes, you need to follow very strict rules.
Yes, Alexander.
I think two things. First of all, on technologies and the exit out of the mess. I think that we would need to use the technologies. We should find some inspiration in Taiwan and other countries because they are living. They are not just sitting in their homes. They are living. They're walking. And look, we can live in the virtual world, but we are a minority. The majority of the people need to socialize back with some distancing. So this is a way how to help. And I think Germans, the Czechs are working on those platforms which would be comfortable with GDPR. I think that the European Commission is now finally doing the same because, you know, to reopen the borders in Europe, I think that this is a requirement to have some kind of common guidance, at least in this. Otherwise, we would not see the opening of the border for plenty of time. So yes, this is an example when we can use the technology on the temporary base, not forever, because it's of course dangerous. On the other hand, I think with regards to the technologies and our vulnerabilities like G5 and all that, I'm skeptical in one thing, that we would never be in full control here. And the only way how to deal with this is to prevent the monopoly, to have a competition, to have a competitive environment, and to finish with some kind of a metaphor. I think when this mess is over, the first thing what I would do in my country is to propose a constitutional law to keep cash alive. To keep cash alive, you know, once we would do everything with one instrument, we would have a problem for the rest of our existence. So we need a competitive environment, and we would need to protect the cash.
Thank you, Alexander. And as we are going to wrap up, let's have the last comments as to the exit strategy. How do we end? How do we go from here? Where do we go from here? How far we go with closed borders, closed businesses, closed lives, basically. What is it? What's the exit strategy, and how do we see ourselves in, let's say, December 2020?
If I may start, you know, Tina, also very briefly, of course, you know, we need first of all to deal with this, you know, pandemic, coronavirus. And I think, you know, Georgia, up to this moment, and especially our fantastic, you know, doctors, they are doing, you know, quite well. They are doing, you know, well. And I need to admit, you know, citizens of Georgia are also engaged in a very coordinated and effective way. And government is, you know, working as well effectively. But we talked about, you know, different issues here. It's about that. But we need to start, and I talked about that, I mentioned that, about thinking about post-corona, you know, world, about economy and how country, because what Sasha, Vondrä, and other colleagues and friends were talking about, you're members of the European Union, you're members of NATO, and you're part of Europe, and you're engaged. And that's obvious, and it's easier for us, for you, you know, just, you know, to survive and, you know, to navigate through these troubled, you know, times. But what about a country like Georgia? We are just, you know, somewhere on the periphery of Europe. Thank you very much, you know, that you mentioned that Georgia is part of Europe, and we think that way. But I think we need to start, and especially government, and I think there is a special role for Georgian parliament and Georgian society, for Georgians in general. We should start, you know, thinking about this post-corona world, and in this regard, Georgia should be, you know, creative, innovative, because there's a lot of, you know, things we can, you know, offer. As I said, you know, how Georgia can be a useful partner, not only, you know, asking for help and assistance, but also, you know, to provide certain capacity to the outside world. And I think, and I've been, you know, thinking and working along with the very effective, efficient ambassador of Japan here in Georgia, and some colleagues from the European Union, how to make Georgia part of this, for example, Japan-EU connectivity, you know, projects and formats. There's a lot of things we can be, you know, useful, or how to activate this kind of triangle between, for example, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Uzbekistan, how to get closer to Europe, you know, Central Asia, and Uzbekistan. So there's a lot of, you know, things, a lot of ideas. And in this regard, I think, you know, Tina, you would agree that, you know, there is a special role for Georgian parliament, which should, you know, be engaged in this kind of process. we innovate, discuss, debate this kind of things, and look into the future, because it's obvious. We don't know yet. We talked about it. We don't know when this pandemic comes to the end, but at the same time, life is going on, as Sasha mentioned. So we need to also be ready for this, post-corona, but getting ready today.
Thank you, Teddo. Roman?
Yeah, I will just end it that authoritarian leaders always find new emergencies, and what was first implemented as a temporary measure quickly become a permanent one. So for this reason, I think that the European liberals and Democrats must be on guard to ensure that no emergency rule undermines liberal democratic values. So of course, emergency measures must be in full respect of our common values of democracy, the rule of law, and respect of the fundamental rights, but they also must be necessary, strictly proportional, and also limited in time.
Thank you. Edwinas?
Well, I'm pretty sure that challenges makes us stronger, and more, we will leave our houses, our homes, not only stronger, but with a good knowledge who are our friends. We did not talk much today, but in those crises, you figure out who you can trust, who is sitting with you, even virtually, as we are doing now, but only in such situations you might see the real face of your friend or not a friend. So I wish everyone to be healthy, use opportunities to find new ways how to make your life better. And believe me, we will be much stronger, and together with Georgia and other partners, we will fight those modern threats, and we will not lose it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Sebastian, did we lose you, or do we still have you? I don't see him anymore. Alexander, do you want to finish this discussion?
I have said everything what I wanted to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for, and as Edwina said, yes, we see who are the friends and who are always there, out there to rely on. And thank you for joining us in this discussion. Thank you for the audience for fantastic questions. I'm sorry I was not able to hear all of them because there were really lots of questions, but I hope that you'll be joining us again in the future discussions. And as I've already said, next Wednesday, same time, 10 a.m. Central European time, we will be back here with another discussion with very interesting panel about the China. Thank you. And yes, be safe, as Edwina said, and digitalize.
Take care.
Thank you, Tina. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Excellent job.
All the
Thank
best.
you. Thanks.